Hi, and welcome back to the second part of Module 1. And in this part, we look at CHIME. The concept of CHIME, standing for connection, hope, identity, meaning, and empowerment, is absolutely critical to how we support people in their recovery journey. And the two core conceptual foundations of everything that will come afterwards are based on the idea of CHIME and the concept of recovery capital, and how we merge them together to create an operational model of supporting people to build the resources they need to sustain recovery journeys. The concept of CHIME is effectively about how we know why people and how people recover. We know a little bit already about what the things are that predict effective change. At an individual level, we know that it's people with higher recovery capital, fewer barriers, fewer unmet needs, who have access to jobs, to friends, and to houses. We know those things. But the challenge for us, and what we'll explore here, is what you as recovery navigators or coaches, and what agencies, including RCOs, can do to support that process of growth. We know much, much less about how to help people. Yet we were helped in this by something that doesn't come from the addictions field, rather it comes from the mental health recovery field. And in 2011, a systematic review was published in the British Journal of Psychiatry by Leamy and colleagues, who are part of a team that at that time were based in King's College, London. And what they effectively did was they did what's called a systematic review of all of the existing evidence of recovery-focused interventions, and they summarized the data and they summarized the core findings from those findings and from those studies. What they basically did was to take some of the things we know about how people change and lead to this model of how do we sustain and support that process of change over time. So let me go back a little bit. I'm going to start by some of the basic things we know about addiction recovery. The general estimate from a Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration report is that 58% of people who have a lifetime substance use disorder will eventually achieve 5 years of stable recovery. Why is 5 years important? Because we know that if people make it to 5 years, their chances of relapse are around 14% in that given year. In the first year after people stop using, the likelihood of relapse is between 50 and 70%. In essence, what we are attempting to do here is to understand how we get people to that point. This is not an acute treatment service. The aim is not to help people achieve initial abstinence, but to sustain that journey and to identify the factors that help people to sustain that journey. And crucially, we know, in the last point on this, on the left-hand side of the slide, is that why people stop and why they manage to maintain stopping are different things. It's a long career, and typically people can have an addiction career up to 28 years in duration. But why people stay in recovery is not about key trigger events or life events. It's about support from other people. Who you spend time with and what you do with those people is critical to our concept of recovery. And in essence, what we have is a model that is translated there into two of the core components of CHIME. It all starts with human connection. And in my career, I've collected around 3,000 recovery stories. Every one of them involves other people. What does positive human connection do? It creates a role model. But it also, through that role model, generates hope that change is possible. And that hope then inspires activity. And the only thing that's out of order about the letters in CHIME is that the M should come before the I. Because the hope effectively acts as the oil in the engine that allows people or supports people to engage in meaningful activity. And that creates a sense of empowerment and a positive sense of identity. And for me, the illustration of a car is perfect for this, because effectively what happens here is the initial shunt that gets the car moving is the positive human connection. The connection allows the process of hope to build within the individual, and that hope inspires a virtuous circle of engaging in a range of meaningful activities. We'll talk more about that later. And those meaningful activities inspire self-esteem and self-efficacy, here classed as empowerment, and generate that positive sense of identity as somebody who can do things and somebody who achieves things. Our model throughout the RECAP process is that positive connections will allow that process to start, and you are the catalyst and the driver. And it's clear from the slide that you can see at the moment that the connectedness fundamentally is about social contagion from one person in recovery to another person in recovery. And that's why peer support is so important for generating that trusting relationship, that sense of community and belonging that generates hope, and the belief that recovery is possible is the motivation that allows people to change. It creates those positive thinking and value efforts. And then we get into the cycle. And in my work, in my research work, one of the most crucial components is meaningful activities that give people a sense of purpose. And there's many diverse things they can do, but the purpose of the end is to drive those two internal characteristics, to give people a sense of pride in their identity and challenge the stigmatized identity and create a sense of empowerment over time. And when Leamy and colleagues first talked about this model and produced this model, it generated huge interest in the mental health. And they produced this questionnaire. Now, we won't use this questionnaire because it's a bit too short and simple for some of our purposes. But in essence, what they did was they created a single question for each of the 5 dimensions, and they called it the brief, inspire, hope. And so they asked, I feel supported by other people, connection. I have hopes and dreams for the future, hope. I feel good about myself, identity. I do things that mean something to me, meaning. I feel in control of my life, empowerment. And in essence, much of what we are attempting to do is to create the conditions to allow CHIME to happen and grow. And those conditions will relate to how recovery capital builds over time. For me, and in my work, the central component of this is about allowing people and affording people the opportunity to engage in meaningful activities. And for me, I've used the acronym of GOYA. So when we did the Glasgow and Birmingham recovery studies around 10 years ago, we found that 2 things were most important in supporting recovery journeys. Connection with other people in recovery, connection part that allows social contagion, and engaging in meaningful activity. The meaningful activity is the M part, and those 2 things are the absolute critical catalysts that will produce the other results. Why GOYA? GOYA stands for get off your arse. If you do things, you will improve. And to test that question, after the initial studies were published in 2011, we replicated them, where we looked at, in 3 different areas in England, people who started meaningful activities, stopped meaningful activities, had involvement in meaningful activities throughout our year of study, or had no involvement. And 2 basic rules. If you start meaningful activity, your quality of life, your physical well-being, your psychological well-being goes up. If you stop meaningful activities, your psychological well-being, your physical well-being, your quality of life goes down. What we have is a second finding that people who engage in meaningful activities throughout have massively higher levels of well-being and quality of life than people who don't. We further tested this in 2017 in Florida, and we got exactly the same finding. Where people in recovery residences don't engage in meaningful activities, they'll still have reductions in barriers to recovery, and they'll still have reductions in unmet need. Where people who are in recovery residences and are retained there engage in meaningful activities, they will grow the personal capital, the personal resources, and the social support system that will allow them to have a strength-based pathway to recovery. And this will be crucial to the next section of work we talk about. And in essence, what these two bits combine to do is to give us a theoretical framework that we can build on to generate the data moving forward.